Welcome to another Friday, and I am here to have a conversation with you. If you have not listened to my podcast before, my name is Amma, and we have conversations. So I've taken to letting you listen to a few of my favorite songs on Fridays. Now, if you know me, you know I love Nonso, and this is one of my favorite songs. So, here's For You by Nonso Basi. It's okay, it's okay, it's okay, my heart is for you. It's okay, it's okay, it's okay, my heart is for you. You can fool me twice. No more playing, no more games. I want you to be my wife. Now you, now you, now you, now you. Yes, you can tell why I love this song. Besides the amazing lyrics and, the declaration of love and everything that comes with it, Nancy has an amazing voice. So go look for it. These are iTunes, what do you call it? YouTube, anywhere. So anywhere they play music, just look for it. Nonso Basi, and listen to For You. He has another single, 411, and I know his body of work is going to be coming out soon, so definitely catch it. And don't say I didn't do anything for you, because you will love his music. So how have you been? I hope you've had a wonderful week, and everything that you set to accomplish, you managed to do it, and happily at that. So I just wanted to jump in quickly and have a conversation with you. Today I want to talk about grief. When I say grief, what comes to mind? What's the first thing that comes to mind when we talk about grief? I know that a lot of the times when you say grief, the first thing that comes to mind is the loss of a loved one, and or people that we are close to, or our friends and family. So today I wanted to bring another perspective. So when we say grief, what do we mean? I think for me, I would say that grief is a natural response to loss. Immediately you lose something, the feelings and emotions that come with it eventually come to the grieving process. And so grief is the natural response to loss. It's the emotional pain you feel and the suffering that accompanies the loss of something or someone we value. So the initial emotions to any kind of loss will be shock, guilt, anger, disbelief, and profound sadness. And people will easily, like I said in the beginning, associate death with grief with the death of losing of the death of a loved one and losing them, the fact that you're not going to see them again. However, I believe that life's biggest challenges can cause you so much grief that life as we know it will get disrupted in a rippling manner, from lack of sleep, inability to eat, think, or general malaise, which often leads to disruption in both physical and mental health. Now, we have always assumed that dealing with the loss and grief can only happen when there is a loss of a loved one. However, certain life situations such as abuse, separation, loss of a job, loss of financial stability, loss of a business, good health, miscarriage, retirement, a cherished dream, a home, loss of a friendship, loss of safety after trauma, loss of a pet, serious illness of a loved one, sale of a valuable property, or even a family property because it holds sentimental values. All these things can lead to grief. Sometimes even very subtle changes like switching schools or moving away from home to graduating from college or university, switching job roles or switching job roles, or even switching the job itself. So even within a company, you can switch job roles, and sometimes it comes with grief, even though it's subtle. The fact remains that all these situations that each loss has is personal, and so is the grief that ensues afterwards, right? Because the loss is personal, as is the grief, the ways to manage them will always be individualistic. It will always be individual to the persons going through it. Yeah, it is a highly individual experience, even for people who have experienced the same loss. So you might have lost a friend, a parent, a sibling. Everybody will grieve it differently, even for siblings or family members. It's individualistic. So this therefore for me indicates that there is not one way to grieve, and the factors such as personality, coping mechanisms, faith, life experiences all come to bear during this process. We then cannot say that there's a time frame to heal and thus a prescribed timetable for the duration of a healing process. That nobody can give that, because immediately the loss happens, the emotions that run through it, everybody, because of their life experiences and things and beliefs and all the other external factors that come with it, they will grieve differently. All right, so where was I? Yes. So as they grieve differently, you begin to feel like, oh, what then is the issue? But you realize that the individuality of humans makes it highly impossible to have a one tailor-fits-all approach to grief. We're too unique as human beings to have the same responses. And so I want to talk about the different stages of grief that were discovered by Eliza Kubler-Ross, and she wrote in her book on death and dying that grief could be divided into 5 stages, but I know that there's 7 stages of grief. That some say 12, some say 2, but I like to go with the 7 stages of grief. But this whole process was begun or discovered by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in her book on death and dying, and after many years of observation, she came to the conclusion that people become shocked when they suffer a loss, and this inevitably leads to denial and the reality of the situation, with statements like, it can't be, they are asleep, or very soon they will come around the corner and it will only feel like a dream, hoping that the person will actually show up. In a case of a separation or divorce, they say things like, oh, they must be upset, they'll be back, they always come back. Terminal illness. For terminal illness, people even sometimes get a second and a third opinion when a doctor gives them their report and says that, oh, this is what we suspect, and this is what we believe, and this is what we think is going to happen in the various stages, because they can't accept the reality of the situation that is in front of them. And so shock and denial will be your first point of call when it comes to the grieving process. All right, after this comes the anger, where they mask the pain and redirect it to other people. Example, if they were fired from work, they are angry because they suspect their boss doesn't like them. Meanwhile, they weren't showing up on time, they weren't pulling through with the team, they weren't showing innovative ideas, they weren't showing commitment, they weren't playing fair, they weren't doing any kind of teamwork. However, immediately they are called out or they lose their job as a result of their own behavior, then perhaps the boss doesn't like them or it's their fault, they might even blame a colleague, some might blame their partners, friends, anything, even inanimate objects that they see around could be blamed for whatever has caused their loss. As usual, as is usually the case, most of the anger is sometimes irrational, and eventually some people realize their anger is misdirected. Others never accept it because that will mean that they have to take a close scrutiny into themselves and their behavior and their thoughts and their patterns. So they would rather blame someone than take up their responsibility in the situation that has occurred to cause them grief. So they begin to bargain after some time, and that is what I term the what if stage. What if I went and apologized and I said I was sorry, I'll never do it again? What if I gave them gifts? What if, like so many other things that come to play in this season. So they are bargaining with themselves in terms of things they felt they could have done, so either in a manipulative way or in a way to show remorse to get that situation that has caused the loss back into the natural reality which they want it to be like. And then depression sets in. You feel all the pain slowly swallowing you and causing you to ask questions like, why is this life? What is the point of this life? This is pointless, and they go into so much into themselves and they become angry. Now, what happens, however, also is that during this time, there's also an upward turn. After the depression sets in, there's an upward turn where all the feelings that are swallowing you begin to die down, and you become clear-headed in your thoughts and processes, and then you process the thoughts calmly, to see where it will take you to. Now, you then begin to accept the loss. You begin to accept the loss that has come with it, and then you're on your way to recovery as you put the pieces of your life back together, accepting the situation and then trying to put your life back together in that sense, because you realize that, the grief has happened, all these reactions have taken place. How then do I go forward and let it go? So eventually you begin to accept the loss, and then you begin to have hope again. I always say that without the idea of hope, life will be bleak and meaningless. The possibility of what the future holds always helps us, tide over when life throws us into a raging storm. So to understand and empathize with people going through grief, we need to know that no one experiences grief in the same way. It's absolutely impossible. Even when they are faced with the same type of grief, no one, not any single person, deals with grief the same way. And so we need to understand that. And then we need to know that grief is personal, and what triggers another's grief is dependent on their life experiences. For instance, someone grew up in a ghetto where they sold drugs and they saw people die every day, or where there were lots of gangs and they saw fighting and people lose their lives every day. They became used to grieving, letting go, and it becomes normal to them now. Someone who hasn't been in that environment, has been in a safe, loving environment, hasn't seen a lot of losses, They will process their abuse, what do you call it, they'll process their grief very differently. You know, a child who's been thrown from one orphanage or one child support protection services or child support group, and then if they aren't lucky and they go to a place where there's enough abuse, their perspective will be different. So anytime they experience grief, it won't be the same way like a child who's experienced loving parents and has grown in an environment that is safe and secure and all of that. Their approach will be different, you know. So I always say that your grief and the healing of it is dependent on their life experiences, their belief system, their support system, their faith, their mental capacity to deal with the loss. You know, a lot of people don't have the mental capacity to deal with certain losses. It turns their whole life upside down, and it's almost as though they are in a boat, it's capsized, and the boat is covering them and is pushing them under the water. They can't turn the boat, and they're just sinking because they can't wrap their head around the situation, right? And you find that while some people cope with loss through prayer, others through journaling, others through music, writing, others throw themselves into work or activities to get their mind off the loss, others become rebellious, recoil, and others just become despondent, you know. So they can rebel, they can become despondent, they can throw themselves into work, because the whole point is they will not sit down to examine the emotions that they are going through and to see where they can, you know, kind of manage it. Because trust me, I lost my father a year ago, and I grieve. You know, there are things that will trigger you, and you be reminded of them, and the grief comes, and you know, you've got to deal with it. So I always say, the loss doesn't get any better. You just learn to manage it better because you understand your triggers and all the emotions that come with it, and so you're able to handle it much better than you would have without the information that you had prior, you know. So I feel like grief can be caused by any traumatic life situation apart from death. It can affect us tremendously, and it disrupts the future as we know it, and so we lose ourselves and we become shocked, angry, we bargain, we as we bargain, we begin to understand, and then we begin to come out of it, and then we begin to go back into life again, you know. So in better managing our grief, we need to understand why we are grieving, who we are grieving for, what's our own personal capacity to handle that mental stress on us, and you know, bring it together. And like I always say, therapy, pray, do the journaling and everything, but go to therapy, because some questions will guide you to the place where you know and understand the kind of grief that you are going through. So I will say that grief is complex. Grief is not a one-size-fits-all situation. Grief is difficult to handle, and grief is individualistic because it's based on your experiences and everything that come with it. So don't let anybody rush you. And so I will leave you with a poem by Alex L. on grief, and it's a short stanza. I said, but how do I let go without falling apart, without crumbling, from losing our grip on what was why we could have been, and why we could have been, on losing our grip on what was and why could have been. So loss makes you lose your grip on what was and what could have been. You lose the past and you lose the future. I guess that's why a lot of people see the loss of a loved one as one of the biggest, because it's a tangible something. You can feel the absence of the person, So think on that poem and know that grief is difficult to handle. It's not an easy route. So don't shame anybody for grieving the way they know how to. And if you know and understand the situation, please be of help to someone who's also grieving. So I want to say that, as usual, thank you for always joining me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing the podcast, for the recommendations. Thank you for nudging me, when I kind of take a break. It's been such a long time. And so I want to say thank you. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. And then have a lot of fun and empathize. Show empathy to people. Make them feel like you understand their situation and you hope for the best for them. And once again, I end with a little bit of Nonso. Go listen to that song because this is a really good song. I'm so in love, very much in love. Who are you? Baby, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. My heart is for you. It's okay, it's okay, it's okay. My heart is for you. Oh, you fool me once, you can fool me twice. And so, for you, by Nonso Basi, go cop that song, listen to it, and enjoy it. It's good music. It's great music. So, do listen to it, alright? And do share the podcast also. So, until next week, catch you later. Have an amazing week. Take care of yourself. Bye.